Welcome to Tenacious Entrepreneurs, where perseverance meets purpose and every setback is just another step forward. Join us as we dive into the journeys of entrepreneurs who faced failures, embraced change, and emerged stronger than ever. Whether you're dreaming big or already on your way, this podcast is here to remind you that the end is only the beginning. Stay inspired, stay tenacious, and let's conquer the entrepreneurial world together.
Hey, this is Joseph Dupont. I'm here with Kevin Drummond. We're going to be talking to you today about the Tenacious Entrepreneur. And I'm so glad to have you, Kevin. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me. I've been looking forward to this conversation all week.
Yeah, me too, man. Well, to get started, I just wanted to ask you a few questions. Like, you're a serial entrepreneur. You have multiple businesses.
Correct.
What are you doing now? Like, what's your background? What you got going on?
So right now, I'm mostly consulting, but that's not where I started. I actually started in marketing and helping businesses who were failing or they were having issues with marketing and issues with advertising. But that's very, very, very time consuming. And as you're growing a family and your responsibilities grow, you have to evaluate what's most important in your life and what should be a priority and what time you want to give to, your businesses and your interests and your investments.
So you've started a business, you went to business school for it and just started a business. How did you start a business? Like, how you get into coaching? You said you're doing coaching.
Yeah, so a mindset coach. So I actually became the product that I wish I had as an entrepreneur, to be quite honest with you. So I actually started as an entrepreneur when I failed at medical school. So I pride myself in the fact that when I took the MCAT for the first time, at the time it was out of, I believe, 45 points, so 15 points for each section, and I got a 15 total. Wow. Composite.
Well, come work with me, Doc.
All-time low score. And I mean, it shattered my life because I went to college for pre-med.
And your parents, obviously, were behind you on this, right?
My mom and dad were like, oh my gosh, my son's going to be a doctor. My entire family's from Jamaica, firstborn in the States as well. So first, family member that's going to college, and everyone was excited. And then you get to the point where you're taking the test and you basically bomb it. Yeah. So what do you do from there? It's like, oh my gosh. So when I graduated from college, I decided to keep going. I decided to do a post-bac program. I traveled for a little bit, got some side jobs, did some cancer research at Moffitt Cancer Center in Tampa, Florida. But eventually I realized that wasn't my purpose. And I then had to ask myself the question, do I want to continue to pursue something that is for others, or do I want to pursue something that resonated closely with what I thought I should be doing and what I felt I was put here to do?
So we step right into sort of the vision behind what we're doing with this podcast. Like I feel like as entrepreneurs, we see so many times that there's positive things that we see, super successful people, and we try to model our life off of them. But a lot of times it's like when you see little girls that are looking on social media and they're seeing supermodels that have had all this artwork done, has nothing to do with their physical bodies, but it looks like they're this amazing person. They try to achieve that, and it's not even achievable. So they get bulimia, they get all kinds of horrible things that happen to them because they're trying to get to that point of doing that. And I see the same thing with entrepreneurs. Like, if we could just be real with people and actually let them see our failures. The problem is it's a Lord of the Flies mentality.
Wow.
You don't want to let somebody see your weakness because they may take advantage of you. And it's true. Like in business, it can happen.
It can.
Where they take advantage of you. But I think it's so important to have a moment of honesty where you can sit down and talk about, hey, these are the struggles that I actually went through. I didn't just wake up and become a millionaire.
Yeah, it's hard.
I didn't just wake up and do this. Mm-hmm. So it's tough, and that's you touched on that. Like, okay, you've failed in your medical training as far as getting your what'd you call it,
So MCAT, yeah, the MCAT, the medical composite admission tests or something or another.
Yeah.
I don't even remember what it stands for anymore. It's an
And how
admissions
did you only
test.
get a 15 on that?
I'm
joking because you didn't know the name of it.
Well, the thing is, like, I've never been good at standardized testing. I
Yeah.
mean, I've always been like an A/B student. I was
Yeah.
on a full ride to Xavier University. I had a 3.6 GPA, but standardized tests, they just were not
Just
for
wasn't
me.
your thing.
They just were not my thing.
Yeah.
And so when I was preparing for the MCAT, I tried these different businesses, and I won't call their names because I don't
Yeah.
want to say they don't work,
Yeah.
but it just didn't help me. And I had to figure out why it didn't work. And so I had to change my perspective as, wow, I'm given an opportunity to maybe help others who think like me, who aren't good at standardized testing. So that's actually
Yeah.
one of my first businesses. I started a test prep company to help students excel at standardized testing. And it was specifically for students who took the ACT, and they jumped. I mean, they jumped up from like 19s to 30s. And it was because I got down to the root of the problem, which was the mindset. And so it's a storyline of why I do what I do now, but it came down to the mindset and the way that I framed the test.
So walk me through, like, okay, you decided I'm not going to be a doctor. You went and started doing these other things.
Yeah.
At what point did you actually pivot into the business you're in now, like your main business? Was it last year, 10 years ago?
It was in 2018 when my life just fell apart. I was going through a divorce. Had to go from seeing my kids every day to only seeing them a couple days a week. And I now had all this additional time that I didn't have before.
Yeah.
So a lot of people, they could sink into depression, which I did. I cried my eyes out many days on end.
Yeah.
But I took a second to reflect at what could I gain in this opportunity, in this pain. What could be learned? What could I bring from this event that could make it worth the pain? And that's when I pivoted and realized how much I enjoyed business. The reason why I'm an entrepreneur today is because of the creativity that it took to create a means, to create a income for myself when, I didn't know how I was going to pay my rent, my electricity, my water. I've had many eviction notices. A lot, like you said, people compare themselves, and comparison is the thief of joy, I'd say. And many times I'd be like, man, I'm about to be 30 years old and I have an eviction notice. Like, I used to be like the golden child that's going to medical school. And I realized that these thoughts, this narrative in my head was a conversation that I was having because I was worried about what others thought about myself.
Right.
Instead of me worrying about how I felt about myself.
So how long ago did you start your actual consulting business?
So I started consulting, I would say, in 2020. I started working with businesses one-on-one in 2019.
Yeah, that had to be tough through the pandemic and everything. You had to go through a lot of video calls, and did you have to make a pivot in your business model?
So again, pivoting. When I went through the divorce, I had to learn how to pivot. When I had rent due, I had to figure out how to pivot. So during the pandemic, a lot of businesses were shut down. They couldn't let customers come into their restaurants. A lot of businesses were trying to get permits to have seating outside. But some restaurants decided to partner with people who were trying to serve the, greater population at large. And so I partnered with the World Central Kitchen because I was working with restaurants and I knew that they had a lot of support, a lot of ammo. And so I worked with them to deploy funds to restaurants across the Louisiana region. And because I was able to pivot and help and serve people in that moment, that's when the consulting and the business really took off, because people saw that no one could predict that this was going to happen, but it happened, and we were still being able to stay afloat and create revenue and to make sure that these people could still live and survive during the pandemic. So that's actually what took me to the next level, being able to show that skill set that I learned in pain and share it with others in the service of others.
Right.
Yeah.
It makes a lot of sense. I think there's a lot to be said about trying to help others, and I think
sure.
Most business ideas that I see that are very successful are ones that are birthed from a position of fixing a problem,
Definitely.
finding a need and filling it. is obviously the mantra of every small business owner. But I remember I talked to somebody one time, and I was struggling with something I was doing in business, and he was struggling. He just went through a huge problem with his business that he was running. His was multi-billion-dollar problem. Mine was $1 million problems. And I remember I contacted him because I figured out a way to go forward. I started helping people, and I consulting, doing stuff like that. And I talked to him and said, man, look, this is the path forward, man. Like, you need to figure out a way to serve people that are worse off than you. I know you don't have money now, and we had a bunch of money, but money isn't your commodity anymore that you can give. You need to give your time. You need to help somebody else and like volunteer to help somebody worse off than you. And that guy said, man, I'm just worried about whiffle. I'd never heard that terminology before. I said, what does whiffle mean? He says, what's in it for me? And I was like, oh, okay. So I stepped away from that guy, and I understood that like the mentality of looking out for yourself is going to put you on an island. You're going to be on the island of whiffle, like you're just worrying about what's in it for you. But looking out for other people, I think that more businesses succeed whenever you're truly trying to serve your staff, trying to serve your people that you're actually serving as far as the business your community. But anyway, I think for you, like that's what you're saying is like you managed to figure out a way to serve people out of their need that they had, and that helped you to be able to pivot. Did you ever have any time where you just felt like I want to give up on what you're doing?
So many times, so many pitches that were made that I spent days on preparing. And I mean, these are deals that, I mean, for some people would make up a whole year's salary. I mean, 50K deals, 100K deals, and they just didn't work out. And sometimes, we had all the, checked off boxes, and it just didn't work out. And in those moments, salaries had to be paid. And I had to figure it out. I definitely wanted to quit. And I, continuously thought, am I doing the right thing? Do I just go get a 9 to 5? Constantly being reminded by family members like, oh, I don't know why you think you're too good for a job. Why don't you just, go apply somewhere? And to be able to have the persistence and the faith that that everything is going to work out, even though it may not look like that in this current moment. So I've definitely had many of those times. And now, instead of thinking of it as doubt, I think of it as an opportunity to break through another ceiling. So if I'm getting uncomfortable, if I am starting to not necessarily worry, but think about other ways to not just double down on this path, well, I know that I'm going the right way, because growing is not comfortable. And I think that's a narrative that has to be corrected. We have this idea that it's going to be a straight and narrow path, and the entrepreneurial path is everything but that. Like everything but a straight and narrow path.
Yeah, it can be all over, for sure. I think that, like, for me, being able to share with people the things that have gone on in my life, I found that I share my successes a lot easier than I share my failures.
Why do you think that is?
I think it's probably because I feel like that I'm seeing more. It's a Lord of the Flies mentality. Like I don't want to show a weakness.
You don't want to show weakness.
You don't want to show a weakness. You have to spin it to where you're not showing a weakness, because if you're showing a weekness, then
someone might
can take
use it
advantage of
you.
you, or they won't respect you, or they won't want to move forward with you and doing things. I remember I was before I wrote the Tenacious Entrepreneur book, I was actually with getting gas at a gas station, and one of the guys that I knew in business that had owned several bars, and he owned a studio, like where they put on concerts. So like he was a promotional guy that did concerts, and during 2020, during COVID, like his business collapsed as far as the events, for doing concerts and stuff. That collapsed. And I saw him at a gas station, and he said, "Hey man, how you doing?" And I said, "Oh, hey, how you doing, brother? I hadn't seen you in a long time. It's good to see you. How are you doing?" And he had that moment where I could see it in his eyes that he was wanting to tell me that he was struggling. But he was doing like I would do. And he was posturing. Like, he was just, well, it's all going great, brother. It's amazing. And I said, really? I said, I drove by your restaurant and I saw that, they weren't open anymore. What's going on? And then he broke and started a little bit of telling me. He was like, yeah, man, I'm sort of, really struggling. Like I ended up having to close my business because of the event, program that I was doing was bad. And that, ended up attacking my other businesses, and the other businesses failed. And he said, I don't really know what I'm going to do. And I started sharing with him. It took me about 10 minutes to unravel a series of failures that I'd gone through, and showing him how I made it through, because they were 10 years past, 20 years past. Some of them were 5 years past. But the failures, I saw something pivot in him, like in his eyes. Like I could sense like hope was coming in him to recognize that, hey, I can make it through this. And I went home and I wrote the Tenacious Entrepreneur that night.
Wow.
I'd been trying to write books for probably 15 years. I had multiple titles. I had multiple chapters written of books that I was starting, and I just never got there.
So now you've sparked my interest. I have chills right now. So essentially, you had these titles on titles on titles that you wanted to write, but then you had one conversation with an individual who was going through a hard time, and then that gave you the inspiration to write a book that you knocked out in one sitting.
I mean, I knocked out the bulk of it in one sitting. I mean, it took me another 3 weeks to get through fleshing it out and getting a little bit more in depth about it. But the majority of the book was just exposing like some of the things that happened in my life, and how I overcame it and how I made it through. And that was, to me, I felt like, I remember one of the books I was writing was, this is 20 years ago, I was writing a book called Kings and Priests. And we were talking about successful entrepreneurs in the Christian business world and how they represent the kings and the kingdom, and the priests are the ones that carry the message throughout. It was a great book. I mean, I literally preached sermons. I did business seminars, all over the world, Brazil and, all over Nepal. I taught messages about kings and priests. And so I was writing the book and I was going to carry that on. And I remember I was in an airplane and I was trying to write the intro. I don't know if you've ever written a book, but you have to like go through, write the whole book, all the chapters, and then you have to come back and write intros and try to break down things and explain it. And so I started writing very simply in my tablet the definition of success. I'm writing a book about success. So I said, success is, and I put a definition, and it was a very Christian-based, finding a way to give away all your income to where you're living on 10% and not trying to live beyond your means and all this stuff. And I got through writing, and I felt like a check in my heart. I felt like the Lord says, anybody that reads this is not a Christian, quote, Bible thumper, going to church every Sunday, they're going to think you're brainwashed and that you're an idiot. They're not going to read this book. And I thought, well, okay, I deleted it. And it was a whole paragraph. And I wrote back something else. It was real flowery. It sounded amazing, and it was very, finding a philanthropic way to, give back to the communities. And it was all great. But when I got through, I thought, man, this sounds like a new age, kind of name it and claim it kind of thing. And any Christian that reads this is going to put the book down and not want to read it because it just doesn't make sense. And this was 20 some odd years ago. I remember I closed my tablet and I said this prayer on the plane going to China 24 hours into the flight. I said, Lord, you define success. Show me what success is. And I'm telling you what, for the next 20 years, I went through a series of failures in my life that were catastrophic. But at some point through all of this, I had the Lord spoke to my heart probably about 5 years ago. And he said, success is the ability to find peace and to keep that peace no matter what. No matter the circumstance, no matter the stuff that's going on, is that your peace is the highest valuable, most valuable commodity you have. And so to me, like, I think that's what happened with you, is like being able to keep your peace and finding a thing that made you peaceful.
That's powerful.
Being able to do it. instead of like, you could have been a doctor because your mom or your dad or whoever
Yeah.
wanted to be a doctor, but you may have been miserable.
Yeah.
And God may have been protecting you, because you would have been, 10 years into being a doctor and said, I hate this.
Yeah. Unhappy.
Yeah. Yeah. You just don't know.
Wow.
So to me, man, I think that, breaking out and actually sharing some of the things that have gone on in your life that has caused you to be able to keep moving forward. Like, do you have any habits? Like, what are your daily habits? I'm not trying to be like super.
No, I'm an open book.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit obsessive when it comes to habits. One of my greatest mentors and role models is Kobe Bryant. And he had something that he referred to as the Mamba mentality. And the Mamba mentality essentially was every day getting a little bit better, every day striving to become the best version of yourself. And there's levels of Mamba mentality. And I think the level that I'm at right now is that he demanded greatness from everyone around him. So I'm trying
I
not
watched the 30-30 about him, and you're right. Like everybody that talked about Kobe was like, man, I thought I was a hard worker, and I never got to the workout facility before him.
Yeah.
He was always there when I'd get there at 5 a.m. Kobe was there. He's like, I thought he lived there.
Yeah. Yeah. So getting up early, like, and it's bad. There's a healthy and toxic way of having habits, I'd say, but I definitely get up early every single day. I journal daily. I also take the time to meditate. What I realize now as an entrepreneur is that true meditation is your ability to remain peaceful, like you said, in all moments when everything's falling down around you and you're still able to just breathe and think about things with a mind of clarity. That, I would say, is one of the most important assets I've gained.
So I want to expound on that a little bit. On so what you're saying is that if you're in the midst of your day and you're struggling because you've had something that's thrown you off kilter, how do you get through that? Yeah.
So belly breathing.
Okay.
So
that's practical.
So belly breathing.
What's belly breathing?
So belly breathing is essentially when you're inhaling, you're pushing your stomach out. I don't know if they can show us on the video, but essentially,
I look like I'm pushing my stomach out all the time.
But so you're taking a deep breath, but you're pushing your stomach out at the same time, and then you're breathing out very slowly across 5 seconds. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So I started doing that regularly. Also, the ability to modify, again, obsessive, like your tone. So if someone infuriates me because they're doing something that to me would seem just common sense, but they just did not, and I can see or feel the rage coming on, one thing that you can do is slow down how the words are coming out. Because as you're slowing down the words, it calms you down at the same time. So your blood pressure drops, your systolic drops, and now you're a lot more calmer. And so the words that are coming out are going to be a lot more polite than what they would have been if you wouldn't have taken that breath and said it a little bit slower.
Something Pastor Larry Stockstill used to say that, when I was being mentored by him years ago, was that you're forced into a position of reacting if you don't take time in the morning to go ahead and get your mind right.
Yeah.
Because if you're reacting, you have a tendency to make bad decisions. But if you're acting, then you don't make bad decisions because you're not being affected by that person. You're being affected, by your creator.
Yeah.
And so for him, he was like, hey, I have to come in the morning and say, God, I forgive people ahead of time. They're going to be ugly. They're going to do stuff. I forgive them now before we even get to that moment. I release them. I know it's not their fault.
That's a great.
And so I remember I was with Pastor Larry back in, this is 30 years ago or more. I sold him an RV. And when I sold him an RV, it was a travel trailer, and he bought it. Back then he had a van, and all of his kids in the van and everything. And they were driving to Florida, and the travel trailer, somehow the axles were not mounted right on the travel trailer, or at least that's what his inspector said. And whenever his inspector unwelded the axle and shifted it back, and it caused the travel trailer, he didn't know was a floating axle, was supposed to float back and forth. And he welded it in place. So it made the trailer like sway no matter what you did. And so Pastor Larry was in Florida, and a trailer almost flipped over his van, with all his whole family, and he was definitely upset. Had to get it towed back on a trailer or whatever. But whenever I talked to him, number one, he never raised his voice. He never was freaked out. He was like, "Well, brother, we're going to have to do something about this." And I was like, "Okay." And I went to my guy that I was working for somebody at that time, and later on that anyway, I was working for somebody at that time, and I went to him and said, "Hey, we're going to have to help this guy, and see what we can do to, he's my pastor. What can we do?" And that guy said, "Well, I'm not too worried about the 3 Ps: pimps, prostitutes, and preachers. They're not going to sue us. Just don't worry about them." I mean, what am I supposed to tell Pastor Larry Stockstill? I come back in and I was like, "Pastor, I'm going to try to help you sell this thing and get rid of it. What I can do?" And he was, through that whole, and I'm telling you, like, I had a level of respect for Pastor Larry before that because I went to church and he was my pastor. And, but at that moment, I recognized that, like, he was putting into practice what actually I'm talking about. He made sure that he was not getting emotional and getting freaked out and and doing what I would normally do. I would have been freaking out. I would have called. I'm calling my attorney. We're going to get the. He was like, "Hey, brother, it's just money. We're going to figure it out. It's going to be all right. We just need to figure out a way to get the trailer sold or get rid of it or do what we got to do." And so we worked through the problem. But I think, like, having that place where you're talking about meditation, coming to a place of actually listening to your soul, and not listening to your environment.
Being able to listen allows you to. I learned this. Instead of reacting, you're creating. It's the same exact letters, actually. So instead of reacting in a moment, create a moment of tranquility, create a moment of peace, create a moment of kindness, create a moment of vulnerability, create a moment of grace if they need it, because sometimes, not most times, no one's perfect. And I think that is something that we spoke on a little bit before we started shooting, is this idea that as an entrepreneur, you have to be perfect. And that's furthest from the truth. The most successful entrepreneurs are the ones that were willing to make the mistakes, that were willing to take the imperfect action, because most people get stuck in ideation versus willing to take the first step, taking that first step into the unknown. That's when fear sets in, that's when the doubts set in, and that's where entrepreneurs usually fall off.
So I think the takeaway that I got from it was, in your most stressful part of your business or life, when you face that stress, you find times to meditate.
Meditate.
And then some practical things about self-breathing and learning how to breathe, and actually learning how to properly meditate has been the thing that's really helped you pull through those things.
And I commit myself to the gym on a daily basis to where I feel uneasy or anxious when I'm not in the gym.
Now, see, I pay my guilt tax to the gym every month. But I don't know that I actually frequent as much. Pastor Larry said this great thing. He said, the hardest machine to work in a gym is the front door.
Definitely true.
Well, man, I want to thank you so much for being on the podcast and for bringing your nuggets of wisdom, man.
Thank you for having me.
And it's definitely awesome to see that you're able to move forward now and give us some practical advice. Is there anything you want to say in closing?
No, I think what you're doing is amazing, and sharing your gems of experience with the world, teaching others how to be tenacious. Definitely get the book. Give them some information on how they can get the book.
Tenacious Entrepreneur, and you can go to tenaciousentrepreneur.com and pick it up, or go to our podcast, and it'll be on the bottom of the podcast. But thank you so much for your time, brother.
Yeah, definitely.
It's great having you.
Thank you.